One of the greatest questions that man has ever tried to answer is the following: what is our purpose here? Of course, thousands of answers have been given to that question over the years, and it's directly related to our paradigm and how we view this life and how we answer questions like the following: how did we get here in the first place? Today, many people believe that we are just a cosmic accident, that life began by some kind of primordial soup, and how we got here through evolution is just by chance and by random processes. And if that's true, then we are completely an accident. We are just the product of chaos without any real purpose or any real value. And people then will try to fill their own lives with their own purpose. And so they'll say things like, live life to the fullest, or do whatever makes you happy. And those sound good on the surface, but really they don't bring any fulfillment in our lives, and they don't answer our true and real purpose. Consider the words of Solomon, the king of Israel, a long time ago, a very wise man. And he wrote the following in the book of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 1, beginning in verse 2, Solomon said, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever." Solomon would go on to try to fill his life with all these different things that people try to fill their life with today to find purpose. Relationships, money, power, fame. All of these things Solomon had full access to. And yet after acquiring those things, he recognized that he still was empty. That life at the end of the matter, when everything was said and done, was vain. And if we are just a cosmic accident, if we don't have any real purpose, then in our lives, no matter what happens at the end of our life, that's it, we're just dead. But what if we are not an accident? When we open up the scriptures, we read the following in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right there, we learn that time, space, and matter were all created in the same instance by God. This is a much different paradigm, of course. And if it is true, then the implications of this have drastic effects on answering the question to what is our purpose and do we have true value in this life. When we look around at the world and we examine the evidence of a creator and of creation around us, what we see is that the universe points to the fact that there must be a creator. For example, the universe cannot account for itself. Something cannot come from nothing. And yet, in all of the different theories regarding the origin of life, there's always been something there to begin with to try to make life happen as we know it today. And yet, where did that come from? What we see is there has to be a transcendent creator, a designer outside of the things that we see and know, just like there is a designer outside of the things that we create as men ourselves. Biochemist Michael Behe describes something that he calls irreducible complexity, and that is looking at organisms and systems that all of the parts have to function together at the same time. And if one is not present, then the rest of it breaks down and falls apart. It's impossible for it to evolve into the state that it is. Examples of this are things like the bacterial flagellum that actually has a functioning outboard motor, a transmission inside of this flagellum with a hook and rings and a drive shaft and going up to 100,000 RPM. And if you take away any one of those pieces, then it cannot function the way that it should. The human eye is another great example. The human eye has over 40 different components that all must be functioning together at the same time for the eye to work. If one part is removed, you no longer have any vision. See, evolution does not account for all of the irreducible complexities that we see in this world. Even when we span out and look at the universe as a whole, science has shown hundreds of factors that depend on all of these things taking place at the same time. And if they were not all exactly as they should be, exactly at the same time, then life would not be possible. You see, in many people's paradigm, they look at the world and they say that we're a product of chaos and accidents. And yet when we look at the world, we do not see chaos. We see order. We see design. And those things just scream out at us that there has to be a creator. The Apostle Paul wrote to the Romans in Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. And he wrote, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." When we look at the creation around us, we see God's design. We see God's fingerprint, if you will. There are many questions perhaps that we'll never be able to answer. And yet, if this is true, and if God spoke these things into existence from the beginning, the same God who spoke all of these magnificent things into being also created you. He personally formed and fashioned you. And as your designer, that gives us not only a great purpose, but that gives us great value. John 3:16 says that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. The creator of this whole universe loved you so much that not only did he fashion you, but he then allowed himself to become a part of his creation and die for you. Your life is worth living because your life was worth dying for by your own very creator. Going back to the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, to the words of Solomon, after concluding everything that he did in his life and understanding these pursuits led him nowhere, Solomon came to a conclusion about what the purpose of life was. And this is what he wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 in verses 13 and 14. Solomon says, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment and every secret thing, whether good or evil." What Solomon understood after he had looked at all of the evidence and everything that he tried to pursue in this life is that our true purpose, the only one worth pursuing as God's creation, was this: that we fear God and that we keep his commandments. And Solomon recognized that as God's creation and that as people that have been given life from God, that one day God is going to take that life back and we're going to have to give an account for what we did with the life that God had given to us. And we are all going to be brought into judgment one day for our actions, whether good or evil. And that means that what we do in this life actually does make a difference. We are not simply an accident. We are not simply a product of chaos, but we are created beings who belong to God. The Apostle Peter also writes something very similar in 1 Peter chapter 2 in verse 9. Peter says that you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. What Peter was explaining is that if we've obeyed the gospel, if we've been called out of darkness and into his marvelous light, then we now proclaim his greatness, his glory. We belong to God. Our lives are not our own. And as such, we've been given this great and ultimate purpose to serve God and to be holy as He is holy in our lives. And now you have to ask yourself those same questions. Will you live your life for its true purpose in serving God and keeping His commandments? And will you recognize the value that your life has to your Creator? He loved you enough to die for you. Will you love Him enough to live for Him?